Any discussion of a theology of Christian nonviolence or a theology of Christian pacifism would not be complete unless we examine the ultimate in violence, the maximum in the use of dominative power, and that is the phenomena of war. Stripped of all its erotic and euphemistic language, war is the resolution of international conflict by the prosecution of mass suffering, misery, torture, and death. I'd like to begin by asking you to take a short true-false test. If you have your pens handy, just mark T or F after each question, and then perhaps at the end of this presentation you can compare your answers and answer and discuss why you answered them the way you did. Okay. Number one. According to Orthodox Christian teaching, to win a fight, either interpersonal or international, means you're right. True or false? 2. According to Orthodox Christian teaching, to start a fight means you're wrong. True or false? 3. Jesus taught that under some circumstances it was right to hate people because they are your enemy. True or false? 4. The person or nation that wins a fight is the one that can execute the most misery most efficiently. True or false? 5. Jesus taught that there are some circumstances in which his disciples were justified in employing torture. True or false? 6. Jesus taught that there are some circumstances under which his followers could do the following. A. Kill for peace and justice. True or false? B. Rape for peace and justice. C. Seduce for peace and justice. D. Lie for peace and justice. E. Steal for peace and justice. F. Abort for peace and justice. 7. Jesus said, "But I say this to you who are listening, love your enemy, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who treat you badly. To the man who slaps you on one cheek, present the other cheek. To the man who takes your cloak, do not refuse your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and do not ask for your property back from the man who robs you. Treat others as you would like them to treat you. If you love those who love you, what thanks can you expect? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what thanks can you expect? Even sinners do as much. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what thanks can you expect? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. Instead, love your enemies and do good to them. Lend without any hope of return, and you will have a great reward. And you will be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked." St. Paul said, "Bless those who persecute you. Never curse them, bless them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and be sad with those in sorrow. Treat everyone with equal kindness. Never be condescending, but make real friends with the poor. Do not allow yourself to become self-satisfied. Never repay evil with evil, but let everyone see you are interested only in the highest ideals. Do all you can to live with peace with everyone. Never try to get revenge. Leave that, my friends, to God's anger. But there is more. If your enemy is hungry, you should give him food. If he is thirsty, you should let him drink. Thus you will heap hot coals on his head. Resist evil and conquer it with good." These words are so vague and so unclear in their meaning that people could not reasonably be expected to know what they mean or what they require in human conduct. True or false? Jesus' words and Paul's words imply and express such a naive understanding of the real world that practically any Catholic high school sophomore would know better than to try to live them, and would have 10 reasonable arguments why they are stupid or impossible. True or false? And finally, number 10, Jesus made it perfectly clear that his words could be modified, changed, or ignored when they were found to be too hard to practice, too hard to live with, or too difficult to fit in to the method of operation of an ongoing institution. True or false? Christianity has two distinct ethics relating to the problem of violence and in its maximal form, war. There is, on the one hand, the 2,000-year-old Pacific ethic. There is also the 1,700-year-old non-Pacific ethic. As we said earlier, early Christians did not engage in war. The New Testament does not see early Christians engaged in war. It was generally agreed upon that Christians could not carry out Jesus' moral revolution, could not proceed to live, incarnate Jesus' ethic of love, and engage in the slaughter, the mass slaughter of human beings. Along about the 4th century, 3rd to 4th century, the non-Pacific ethic came into vogue, approximately at the time of Constantine. It was formulated by St. Augustine, and its formulation has changed and varied over the centuries. However, there are normally 3 basic criteria that have to be met in all formulations of the just war ethic, if the ethic, regardless of who proposed the ethic or when it is proposed. First, in order for a war to be just, and therefore for Christians to engage in it, under the non-Pacific just war ethic, the war has to be justly instituted. The requirement of just institution is, of course, reasonable. You simply do not go out and engage in the mass slaughter of human beings if what you are about is that, unless you go through the normal processes of government that would allow for that and hopefully would try to prevent that. Just institution. Remember now, if any one of these criterion are missing, the war is not just. The killing is therefore unjustified killing. Unjustified killing is by definition murder, and Christians cannot engage in it if any one of these is not met. The second standard that is universally applied in the just war theory is just cause. The cause of the war has to be just. Just. The situation is that this terminology, just cause, would seem to open up the world as far as causes that could be declared just. The fact of the matter is, since the institution of the just war theory, it has been recognized that there is only one kind of cause that is just, and that is the cause must be defensive. Only defensive wars are just. An offensive war is an unjust war, and Christians cannot participate in it. An offensive war is unjustified killing of people and is murder. Finally, we have the criterion of just means. The means employed to prosecute a war have to be just. The situation is that there has to be some proportionality between the means that are being employed and the evil that is going to be overcome. So, for example, to use the analogy, the just war theory says, which is an extension of justified violence theory, that you may want to slap your child's hand if he throws a glass on the floor at the table. But there is no proportionality and no justice in cutting his hand off. If we take a look in terms of contemporary history at these three standards, just institution, just cause, and just means, and ask ourselves, what about their limitations? What about their applications in terms of, say, the Vietnam War? Well, obviously, in terms of the Vietnam War, we have an enormous problem with just institution. Why? Because the war was never declared. There is a formal apparatus for declaring war, as was done on December 7, 1941 with the Second World War. That apparatus was never employed. The war was never instituted according to the standards that the society has set up to institute war. Therefore, the war is unjust. Therefore, Christians cannot participate because killing in it is murder. The cause. Remember, the cause has to be defensive to have a just war. Was the Vietnam War a defensive war? What threat was North Vietnam to the United States? Thirdly, just means. North Vietnam is approximately the size of the state of New York. More tonnage in terms of bombs was dropped on North Vietnam than was dropped in all of the Second World War. Were the means just? Remember, what is not required is that all three areas be found to be unjust. If one area is not met, if one criterion is not met, the war is unjust, the killing is unjust, it's murder, and Christians are prohibited from participating. There is a unique dimension of this problem that confronts us today, and it involves especially Catholics, and it involves the just means standard of the just war theory. A little over 100 years ago in Vatican I, there was a document presented and passed called the Syllabus of Errors. The Syllabus of Errors was a condemnation of all kinds of things that were going on in society and in culture at the time. It was a very defensive kind of approach to religion. But it was one condemnation after the other. The spirit of condemnation in Vatican I became somewhat of a joke afterwards, because the Pope who was Pope during Vatican I was Pius IX, and in Italian, Pius IX, of course, is Pio Nono. Now, Vatican II, being conscious of that spirit of condemnation, totally avoided all condemnations. It took a different kind of approach to the world as far as Christianity and religion in general were concerned. It avoided all condemnations except one. And that is in Church in the Modern World, and it reads, approximately, the indiscriminate destruction of civilian populations and large areas of land is a crime against God and humanity and merits our unhesitating and unequivocal condemnation. Vatican II addressed itself in its only condemnation to the just means criterion of the just war theory. It said that those means that indiscriminately kill large civilian populations and large areas and destroy large areas of land are intrinsically evil. The fact of the matter is that what this effectively does is that it makes all Catholics nuclear pacifists. The situation is this: if you cannot employ means that destroy large areas of land and civilian populations indiscriminately, then you are effectively prohibited from participating in nuclear war, because that is all that nuclear war can do. It can only destroy indiscriminately. However, nuclear weapons are not the only weapons that can destroy indiscriminately. All kinds of conventional weapons, especially aerial and naval weapons, simply destroy indiscriminately. Once dropped, they destroy cows, chickens, men, women, children, and possibly soldiers without knowing the difference. And they destroy over large areas of land. Also, if one is a nuclear pacifist, doesn't one also have to be a biochemical pacifist? For biochemical war can destroy indiscriminately and perhaps can even be more deadly than nuclear war. I remember way back in the early 60s or late 50s when there was an outcry over the United States supposedly secretly producing biochemical weapons, and Senator Smathers was part of an investigation, a Senate investigation on this whole matter. And I remember him in a television interview coming out and saying that he saw that the United States had a vial no larger than that. And if put in the right air current, it could destroy 300 million people. And that the United States had 100 of these vials placed around the earth. And then Senator Smathers said, but he felt that we weren't doing enough in this area. Now, the fact of the matter is, and the question that I have to you is, under what Vatican II said, under the only condemnation, under the only presentation of any activity as totally intrinsically evil, that is, activity that destroys large areas of land and indiscriminately kills people, as being intrinsically evil, isn't it a fact that Catholics would have to be nuclear pacifist, biochemical pacifist, and would have to be pacifist in relation to most of the weaponry that's produced and used by any government in the world, but especially the United States government. All right. This is the just war theory. Historically, in fact, it was not a theory that was put together by Augustine to justify war. It was a theory that was put together by Augustine to make war difficult. It was a theory that was put together to say, these are the standards that must be met in order for men to kill injustice. The most serious dimension of the just war theory, the most serious area that we can probably discuss in this whole thing today, and which is something that is seldom discussed, is the just war theory a most accurate presentation of Christianity? Why? Because no war ever has been fought, and no war could ever be fought that would meet these three standards. The fact of the matter is, war cannot be conducted in justice. If it should occur that some people say it can, it would be interesting for them and for all of us to hear what war that was. I don't know of any such war. Finally, if one is a non-pacific Christian, that is, he believes that a Christian can use violence in the name of social responsibility, all the way up to mass violence, mass murder, mass torture, mass suffering, the prosecution of it. If one is a non-pacific Christian, then it seems to me that in all reality, he has to face the question, if these are the standards that he is using, and they are the standards of Orthodox Christianity for non-Pacific Christians, how can he pay for weapons that are nuclear or biochemical, or weapons that kill indiscriminately? What I'm saying is, how is it possible, for example, if all Catholics are nuclear pacifists, how is it possible for Catholics to shell out billions of dollars annually in order to pay for weapons that are going to prosecute a nuclear war? Remember, 75% of our nuclear weapons are not aimed at military installations. 75% of our nuclear weapons, according to congressional testimony, are aimed at cities. That's civilian population. The argument goes, I believe it was created by Paul Ramsey in the middle 1950s. The argument goes something like this, in answer to the objection that I just raised. It is possible for Christians to pay for nuclear weapons, even though Christians cannot engage in nuclear war, because nuclear weapons can be used as a threat, even though they cannot be used in fact. Now, there are some problems with this argument. First of all, it goes against the history that no weapon that's ever been created has not been used, including nuclear weapons. Secondly, it goes against explicit United States policy as articulated by Secretary McNamara beginning in the early 1960s, that the United States would in fact employ nuclear weapons in a defensive war. Thirdly, it goes explicitly against what the last two Secretaries of Defense plus Secretary Kissinger had said, namely, that not only will the United States use nuclear weapons in a defensive war, the United States will now use nuclear weapons in offensive war if necessary. How can Christians pay for weapons that indiscriminately are aimed at indiscriminately destroying large numbers of people, civilians, even if they are just war Christians. When one is examining the problem of war, one necessarily comes up against a question of defining what it is that one is calling violence. We have been talking here on a theology of nonviolence, and by necessity, at some point, we should define concretely the word violence. The best definition that I know of, the one that I like to work with, is this. Violence is responding to a person as an object for the purpose of self-gratification. Violence is responding to a person as an object for the purpose of self-gratification. It comes from the word to violate. You violate the nature of something when you do not treat it as it is supposed to be treated. For example, to treat a human being as if the human being were this chair, as if it were an entity that had no feelings, that had no loves, had no fears, no joys, no hopes, no sorrows, no family, is totally unacceptable. It's to violate the person. To violate the person, to treat a human being as an object, is to do violence to him. It's to use him as a thing. It's not to care about the fact that he has feelings, that he has families, that he has loves, that he has hopes and joys, that he wants to live. What it's all about is to use him as a thing to gratify one's own self-interest in some way or another. Now that's a formal definition. A definition that I think I prefer, a definition that it seems to me is superior, not because it's as logical, but because I think it gets closer to the reality, is this. Violence is forgetting or ignoring that there's an infinity behind every face. Violence is forgetting or ignoring that there's an infinity behind every face. Jean-Paul Sartre, Nikolai Berdyaev, Daniel Berrigan all have the same sentence in their writings. The sentence is, the greatest sin of the age is making the concrete abstract. The greatest sin of the age is making the concrete abstract. What I'd like you to do now, if it's possible, I'd like you to take the article that you have entitled Social Science and the Theology of War, written by Gordon Zahn, who's chairman of the Sociology Department at the University of Massachusetts, and take a few minutes to read those 2 pages in light of what we have been saying here in terms of definitions of violence, in terms of the just war theory, in terms of those basic questions that we asked at the beginning of this session. So now, if we'll take a few minutes and read the Zahn article on social science and the theology of war.